The Avatar Four Nations Readathon runs twice a year in January and July. Everyone is taking part at their own pace, but there is an interactive Discord community for running polls and asking for recommendations, and I think a year-long challenge every year that I don't take part in, but you could look up if you were interested. The premise of the readathon is that you are working to become the Avatar. And to do that, you obviously have to work through the ranks to master each of the 4 elements. There are different levels to each element, and as you go through the levels, there become more prompts per level and they become trickier. There are also some kind of side talents or groups that you can read books in order to join, and you'll need to do everything eventually to complete the Avatar state. I started out in the Earth Kingdom, and I have been working on this readathon now, I think for at least maybe like 4 cycles, so 2 years maybe, and I'm finally at a point where I think this could be the month where I finish my Earth Kingdom journey. I have 2 prompts left, ones that I've tried to fill and I didn't quite make it, but this month I think I have the time. It's only 2 books. I'm gonna knuckle down, I'm gonna finish it, and I will have achieved my Earth Kingdom status. Then in January I can decide whether I want to move on to whichever kingdom and element is next, or whether I'm kind of happy with where I am and I want to just draw a line under the readathon. The 2 prompts that I still need to read are a book with Traitor in the title and a book with a fan on the cover. So for Traitor in the title, I plan on reading The Traitor, or as it's called in America, I think, The Traitor Barrow Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. I don't really know anything about this other than it is a political fantasy, and I've been told that I should probably like it. Then I plan on reading Crown Duel by Smith, and as you can maybe tell, this doesn't actually have a fan on the cover. This is because this book is actually a bind-up of Crown Duel and Court Duel. This is another one I've heard I should really like. It's an almost classic political fantasy YA with a cozy, everyday life type of vibe to it, apparently. I've heard that it works really well with something like Summers at Castle Auburn by Sharon Shin that I read last year and utterly adored. Since there are technically 2 parts to this bind-up, I want to read both the books for the prompt. I have actually already read the first couple of chapters in this just to get a sense of whether it was one that would work, and I do really like the writing so far. There's a blurb on the back by Tamora Pierce, one of, if not my all-time favourite childhood writer, the writer that really got me into fantasy and back into reading as a preteen. And I do think that there's something similar in the writing style. This is from '94, and that would kind of, I guess, track with Tamora Pierce's books and when they were being published, and it definitely feels similar in a lot of ways. It begins in a cold and shabby tower room, where young Countess Maliara swears to her dying father that she and her brother will defend their people from the growing greed of the king. That promise leads them into a war for which they are ill prepared, a war that threatens the homes and lives of the very people they're trying to protect. But war is simple compared to what follows. When the bloody fighting is done and a fragile peace is at hand, although she wants to turn her back on politics and the crown, Meliara is summoned to the royal palace. There she soon discovers friends and enemies look alike, and intrigue fills the dance halls and the drawing rooms. If she is to survive, Meliara must learn a whole new way of fighting, with wit and words and secret alliances. In war, at least, she knew whom she could trust. Now she can trust no one. So I'm not entirely sure if that description is giving us an overview of both books, whether the first book is that war that's talked about and that second book is purely at court, or whether this is just giving us a kind of flavour of the story together and we will have a bit of both of these in the first one and then something completely expanded on in the second one. I don't know. I am more intrigued by the section that happens at court, but from where I am right now, we have had the father dying, Meliara and her brother Bran are leading or beginning to lead a rebellion that they and their people are very ill prepared for. They're very much a distant province far from the crown. They are already overtaxed, they are underprepared, they are struggling, and it very much feels like a lower ranks rebellion, even though we are being led by a count and countess. We also have their battle strategy advisor being a blacksmith or one of their, head advisors is a baker. They're a very ground level rebellion, even with the nobility that are involved. I really like Mel so far. She is a bit of a tomboy, but it's not quite as far as that not like other girls kind of feel to it. She doesn't necessarily feel any interest for having her hair braided, for wearing fancy clothes, but she's also not fantastic with a sword. She would like to be a fighter. She would like to be Arya Stark, but she's never been trained for it, and when she tries, she gives it her best, but she accepts that she's probably only as good as a 10-year-old boy who's never picked up a sword before. She's not going to be able to take on grown men or fighters, and so she suggests that she and some of the younger children who aren't able to actually help in the fighting act in a kind of guerrilla warfare way, where they start to play pranks on the invading forces to make them uncomfortable, to make them feel like they are being persecuted by the land itself. They break dams and flood camps and scare away horses and put itching powder in the commander's tents, which all sounds a lot of fun, but these people are really struggling, and where I got to, Malaria has just been kidnapped during one of these reconnoiterings, and it's looking really dark for her. She's about to be taken to the capital to be tortured and to be publicly executed as a criminal, which sounds like it's going to be pretty horrific, and I'm really interested to see who in this scenario she can or should or will turn to for help. So I have finished what I will call part one, I guess, which is technically the entire Crown Duel novel. We spend the vast majority of the book on the run. Meliara and her brother Bran have rallied their people. They have fought kind of guerrilla style tactics to beat back this invading force driven by the king under the control of at first a baron and then a viscount, and Meliara ends up on the road, on the run, being hunted down by these two different men. And we get to see her, in some cases, make new friends, forge alliances, but largely she's on her own for the majority of the novel, and she's trying to outsmart these two military thinkers. She doesn't always make great choices. In fact, a lot of the time she makes really, really bad choices. And she is stubborn to a fault. She refuses to see things that I think as the reader seem fairly clear to us. She's very blinkered by the life that she's lived already, by the isolation and being away from court, what her parents have told her court and people at court are like, and she misses a lot of the signs. And as she goes out into the world, she is filled with the righteousness of her cause. And I think being out in the world, she starts to see where things aren't necessarily as clear. There's a great scene where she has taken refuge in a farmhouse. She is being healed and fed and tended to by this family. And she kind of thinks, you know, this terrible king, would these people, would you not love for him to be overthrown? And they point out that in a way, it doesn't matter to them who is ruling them if soldiers are going to come through their land and destroy their farm and their harvest and their way of life, their economy, in order to put someone better on the throne. And Mel has to kind of challenge her own biases, where she's maybe not necessarily thinking of the people she wants to rule. She is still partly just thinking of it as an us versus them thing. Over the course of the novel, she does become a bit of a folk hero, and it's fun because she's really succeeding in spite of herself. Often she is barely keeping her head above water. She's not this bold, noble Robin Hood figure. She's not the best strategist. She succeeds a lot of times through luck or through other people's help, but it's somehow charming in that, and actually I think probably as a novel more charming because she feels like a very grounded, very kind of the people type of character. I really liked that Mel and Bran don't challenge this mighty, powerful king and somehow win against all the odds purely by themselves. In fact, they don't really win at all. What they do is get themselves caught up in another plot to overthrow the king, one they don't know about, get in the way of that, mess that up, make that more complicated. I really liked that we don't have these quirky young kids who just happen to have what it takes to win a throne and rule a kingdom. They, by and large, are pretty bad at it, and yet somehow they're just on the edges of success, where people that are more aware, are more strategists, have been working for longer, actually are the ones that succeed, which makes more sense. These two don't know anything about strategy or military. Why would they suddenly succeed? But we get to see that other campaign through their eyes, and it's refreshing, I think. And there's an innocence to both Bran and Mel that is charming. There is, in a lot of ways, a touch of the Katniss, I guess, a touch of Katniss to Mel as a character. She is smart, but she is stubborn to a fault, to her detriment at many points. She is, in a way, becomes a figurehead while actually not being a tactician, while other people are moving the pieces on the board around her as well. And I actually quite like that in the short space of time the novel is happening, she doesn't suddenly become a strategist or a fantastic fighter. She keeps herself alive, and really that's the best she can hope for in this scenario with kings and soldiers and armies, so that by the time we get to the end, she is happy to retire from the field. She is happy to relinquish control and return to the home that she originally was defending. She's not aiming for a crown by the end of the book. She's no Aragon here. She's not someone who has, at the beginning, been set up as quite reclusive, quite solitary, but somehow completely able to lead the world's biggest armies against their greatest foes. She feels like someone who's done her bit and is ready to retire. The only thing I had a problem with is there is a hint of, it's not even a hint of a romance at this point, it's a hint of a precursor to a slow burn romance between Mel and Vidandrik. As a reader, see ways in which he clearly respects her, he likes her, and it's her biases, her experiences with him up to this point that are colouring her judgment. And partly I think it's just that this is a book from the time it's from. It runs very similar to most of the YA books from that period. There's a woman, there's a man, they have a sort of respect between them. There's almost a mentor-like figure there in Vidandrik. He's a lot more experienced and a lot more worldly than Mel is. I don't know how I feel about it because it does feel like there's a pretty big gap between them. And I don't know that there is, because I don't think we're ever specifically, if we are told Vidandrik's age, then I missed it. But he is leading armies. He's been given this role by the king to squash the rebellion and then to find Mel. He's, I think, quite known as a kind of playboy type at court outside of this kind of military situation. Mel, we talk about in the opening book, is just approaching kind of what they call her flower day, which is a coming of age party. And she feels young. She feels younger than I think she is. And then Vidandrik, I don't know if he is maybe like in his late teens, early 20s, or whether he's older. It feels like there's a significant age gap, but I don't know if that's just worldliness, but I don't know how I feel about it. So I don't know, I'm hoping that they're gonna become more equal in terms of knowledge and experience and maybe age. I don't know, I need to see whether that gets mentioned. But I absolutely loved the book though, absolutely loved it. This was the 5-star. 4.5 or 5, definitely. The next book is, I think, going to be the part that says, she soon discovers friends and enemies look alike and intrigue fills the dance halls and drawing rooms. If she's to survive, Maliara must learn a whole new way of fighting with wit and words and secret alliances. In war, at least she knew who she could trust, now she can trust no one. So we're going into that section now, the courtly intrigue. I feel like maybe I've heard there's some spycraft involved. It's the side of the book that I was the most interested in, so we're gonna see how that plays out. We'll just put up the ebook cover here since I'm gonna be talking about Court Duel now rather than Crown Duel. I've finished the second part, the second book, however you want to think about it. And honestly, I owe so many people who recommended me this book, who told me I would love this book, I owe them so many apologies because I did. Taken together, even, I adored it. There wasn't as much of what I would think of as political scheming and court intrigue as maybe I thought there might be, but what we did get was perfect and it was the right amount for the story and the tone that was being told. So 5 stars before we go anywhere. I think the tone issue is something similar to what I was saying in the first one, where Mel initiates this rebellion and doesn't really win it. People around her win it. And we have something similar happening here now she's moved to court. There is intrigue happening around her, but by and large, Mel is observing things, letting the reader observe things, struggling to keep her head above water. Again, she's very aware of what she isn't aware of. She doesn't understand fan language, which is used a lot. She doesn't understand the nuances, the way they talk to each other, the family dynamics between different people, the existing relationships. She knows she doesn't know these things. She is trying to pick it up, but by and large, she is still going to come off as a bit of a rube, and that's okay. And I really like that. She isn't suddenly polished. She doesn't suddenly know everything. She's not pulling off these fantastic intrigues. She's far too blunt for that, but I liked getting to see her trying. There is a difference in her from the book one, but it feels like a natural progression. We start off with Mel back home. She has been building the castle, the village, into something that she can be proud of now that she has some of the king's money to do that. Bran returns home with a fiancé in tow and Vindaric, and honestly kind of deserved to get shot in the first book because he acts like a right bore. He's been at court while Mel has been rebuilding. He's been quite openly unpolished there, and they have seen this as charming in a way that Mel, and I think we as a reader know that they won't see her naivety as charming. It's charming when it's a brash young man. It'll be mocked when it's her. But he comes back, he looks down on everything she's done, he looks down on what she's wearing, he looks down on the comments she makes, and honestly, I would have slapped him. But he invites her along to engagement celebrations. There's a lot happening in the city that obviously Mel gets roped into. And we do have a little bit of a My Fair Lady situation. Nee, who again, I thought we might have a conflict there. I am the countess, but only through her kind of father saying that her and Bran should split it. Mel knows that there can only be one countess and that she technically isn't it, despite the airs that everyone has given her. So I thought that there might be the new countess coming in, making her mark. Maybe she's quite courtly and has been manipulating Bran, and we'd have then plucky young Mel go up against her. But Nee's lovely, and Nee comes in and really understands Mel and really takes her part, takes her side against Bran and against the court and the city in general. And now we start to see some of those things that we saw from Mel's point of view when she was in court in the first book. We now get to see that from, or to hear about it from Nee's point of view, where Mel thought all these people were gathered to watch her be embarrassed in front of the king. They were laughing at her, and Nee hated doing what they called the duty, which is when they all got summoned and basically took turns in having to be the king's appreciative audience. And it paints a new picture of these people for Mel, that maybe they didn't enjoy mocking her. Maybe some of them did, but maybe a lot of them were just as controlled by the king as she was. Nee calls them hostages. She talks about how they were there to ensure their family's good behaviour. She talks about that's why they have developed this fan language, so that they can communicate with each other and the king won't understand. So we are getting a little bit of a different point of view of how the court, the city are just snobs and can't possibly understand what we in the outskirts have going on. We get to start to see the blur between those lines. And in terms of those politics, I like that Mel can tell something's going on, but she doesn't know enough to see beneath the surface. And that felt really appropriate for her coming from this isolated homestead into a much more political arena. And she thrives by being who she is, by being honest. Yes, there's some polish on her now, but by and large, she gets these friendships, these alliances through being honest, by being courageous, by being truthful. Truthfulness, she points out, is anathema to these people, and it's something really fresh and new that she does, and I really like that. We also had some really nice world building in how this court functions. One of the things I found really, really interesting for me about reading this book was it being YA from the 90s. It's so different from YA now, and I think you really see it here. In one sense, if this was YA now, Mel would have been far more polished. We might have had that kind of training montage almost to get her there, but she would have been very, very polished. We would have seen her be much more capable compared to this book that our YA protagonists now seem to have. They tend to be very confident and very capable. You know, you can do anything, and they succeed at doing these things, or they at least are good at them without really having any basis for that. Whereas Mel strives, but she's never excelling. And I like that about her. It kept that kind of grounded feeling. She's constantly struggling. She never really finds her footing or, you know, leads the charge in terms of the politicking. Similarly, the romance, which does develop more in this book, and we'll come back to that, but the romance would be so different in a modern YA. In this, it's an incredibly slow burn, to the point where honestly I was starting to think we wouldn't see any resolution to it in the novel, despite it being really, really gradually pulled at all through the book. It only really resolved itself in the last couple of chapters, and even then it's very minor in terms of plot point. And I think partly that's just the way a YA novel would write romance in this time. The romance isn't what we would think of as a YA romance now. It's not at the fore, it's not really dramatic, it's very subtle and very understated. And in terms of the romance and in terms of Mel as a character, I found myself thinking at some points that it was very young for YA, and at other points that it was quite old for YA. And I guess that's that point of YA being that mid-ground between children's, as it would have been known, and adult, and you really see that. And I'm almost thinking it's the difference between YA now and genuine young adult books. They're books for young adults versus what we have created in the YA sphere, where we have protagonists that are a touch older but feel more like, quite often, people in their mid to late 20s, just with much more dramatic relationship woes. And I think that this really captured that spirit of the 90s YA in the romance and characters. On a completely kind of different angle to that, but reading it as a modern reader who is used to what we get now in romance, especially on that kind of younger end of the scale, I almost felt like I was expecting some kind of reveal from Mel about maybe some kind of demisexuality or something, you know, on the ace spectrum. Obviously we didn't get that because it's the 90s. But honestly, I think you could read it that way as a modern reader. Mel talks about being a late bloomer. She talks about being more comfortable in the kind of children's dances than in the romantic ones. She talks about not understanding when people talk about a character and how attractive they are. She makes some comment along the lines of that he's beautiful the way like an ice sculpture is beautiful, or the way some kind of landscape detail is beautiful. But you don't get the sense that she really comprehends attraction the same way. By the end of it, obviously she's like, oh, I think I knew before I knew, or something along those lines. But for quite a lot of it, I honestly wouldn't have been shocked if there had been some kind of ace spec rep there. There isn't, I should be clear. But it gives you a difference in the tone to the way YA characters are more likely to act now. That said, on the romance, I was eventually sold. The age gap is, I don't think, as big an age gap as I felt it was. This book feeling like an age gap, it no longer has that feel to it. Vin Darrick feels a lot younger, Mel feels a tiny scooch older. The age gap doesn't feel like a problem. I found in the beginning was that it felt more like a gap in experience. He is worldly, he's not looking down on her, but there is an almost paternal or mentor quality to the way he looks upon her. A kind of fond teacher aspect almost. And that was a little bit strange for me. But over the course of the book, we get to see them kind of get to know each other, working around, honestly, almost entirely Mel's hang-ups and prejudices. And by the end, yeah, I was rooting for them, and I'm surprised in all honesty, but I really enjoyed it. I was going to say I would definitely look up Sherwood Smith's books in future, but I did. I honestly, I looked them up because I really wanted to see if there's anything more in this world. She does have a massive back catalogue though of kind of fantasy romance, if you like, from the kind of 90s, 2000s. So I definitely think I'll be checking out the author again in the future. I just need to maybe give myself a little bit of time, because if it's not this story with these characters, then at the moment, I don't think I'd give anything a fair shot. I don't think I'm in the mood or the headspace to enjoy something else she offers that isn't this world and these characters. I think maybe if I give it 6 months, I can pick one of her other series and have a really good time. Well, I assume I'll have a really good time with it. But at the moment, I'm just like, no, I just want this. So the next book I'm going to pick up is The Traitor, for the book, the prompt, a book with the word traitor in it. It's another political one, but this one is definitely adult, so it's going to be an interesting vlog. I'm gonna see. I think I'm gonna get a lot more politics in The Traitor, and I think it's going to be more administrative fantasy rather than swords and crowns and that style of courtly intrigue. But I'll let you know how I got on. I have had this recommended to me before because it's supposedly quite political fantasy by way of what I personally have always referred to as like administrative fantasy, dealing with the nitty-gritty of ruling your empire. This one starts us with Baru as a child on an isolated island. I'm only a few chapters in. We see through her eyes the process of a larger empire assuming their culture. We see first through trade, and as Baru points out, because she's very smart even from the beginning, that the traders will only take payment in gold and jewels, but they will only pay her people in paper money. And she points out that so they take away everything that they could use to trade with other cultures and leave only the paper that is only good for trading with them. So they're really tying them into their economy. She's accepted into the school that they build and is very quickly indoctrinated into this empire's way of thinking. But she does manage to hold on to her own past, her own culture in small ways, and does see the injustices. Partly because she's lost her father, partly because they're telling her that her parents are sinners or whatever. And she decides that the best way that she can defend her people isn't through shield and sword the way her mother or her father would have done, but it is to do the best she can, to excel in school, to take the governance tests for bureaucrats that the empire does. She's going to make it to the top, find a way into power and change this empire from inside, getting revenge along the way. This is a great job of giving us all of that through the eyes of Baru as a young child growing up till she hits kind of her 20s. There's a certain naivety to the way that she sees things, but you can tell that she's a very smart child, but she never feels like an adult in a child's body, which I feel is an important distinction. We're definitely seeing it through the eyes of a very intelligent child. From a writing point of view, I think is incredibly impressive, because kids are hard to get right at the best of times, and very smart kids either come off as annoyingly precocious or just seem like tiny little adults. Whereas I think Baru does feel like she's meant to. Where I've got to, she has just excelled in her exams, and instead of being sent to the heart of the empire, she's been sent as an accountant to a far-flung province. And that's where we're kicking off. I think this is going to be something I'm going to love, because that is exactly the kind of thing I mean when I talk about like that administrative political fantasy. The bureaucratic workings, the everyday stuff. I know it's not everyone's taste, but I love it. And it's hard to find books that do it and do it well. I've heard that Baru is a really interesting protagonist, really exciting protagonist, and I think I can see that already. She definitely has layers to her. I don't know if this is a standalone or if it's the first in the series. I haven't looked it up yet. I don't think I'm going to. I'm gonna go with it and we'll just see where we end up. But I am having a good time so far, and I mean, it could be a 5-star. I honestly, at the moment, it could be a 5-star. And if it is, well, one, this is a really good vlog for me. But also, I kind of feel like an idiot because both these books have been on my TBR shelf for ages. And I should have read them much, much sooner. But we're having it now. I had an experience with this one. I planned on checking in more often, and it wasn't that nothing was happening. There were loads of things happening, which we'll get to. But somehow I never felt like I had enough to say that it was worth turning the camera back on. Now that I'm finished, I definitely think that I prefer the American title, although I don't think either one feels particularly more fitting for the book. And I also definitely prefer the American cover. I would look into buying those if I decide to continue the series. Which sort of brings me, I guess, to my first point, which is that I didn't know if I was gonna finish the book. For me, found the book's biggest flaw is that the pacing is a crapshoot. It comes and goes. The book is split into sections. So we have Accountant when she first arrives, when she gets to know this new way of life, this new culture that she's become embroiled in, and starts to make those financial decisions. If I'm honest, that's what I thought the book would be. Then we move into a section called Warlord, and then there's a little bit at the end. And I do think that most of the action happened in the Warlord section, but the pacing even there still I found a bit choppy. There were moments where we had incredibly big dramatic battles happening over the course of a couple of pages, which worked for me because I'm not a huge fan of battle scenes. But we also had times where minutiae was dragged out quite a lot. And I usually quite like that in my political fantasies. I like to know all of the behind the scenes machinations, the wheeling and dealing, the subtle, this tiny detail bringing down an empire. But somehow the pacing in this just, it came and went. And that might be because there's so many characters, which again is maybe a second, not flaw. I think you need a big cast of characters to pull off the story this book is telling. It had to feel completely epic. It had to feel like we had a real world here. We have not just the 12 duchies, but we have the administrative system, we have the masquerade as a concept. Each of these players have their own pieces on the board and are moving them. So it is a really, really dynamic, really big cast. It just maybe made things a little bit sometimes hard to track. Thankfully there is a map at the start of the book and I did refer back to it quite a lot. It started really strong and then I found myself losing interest. And I had reached a stage at one point where I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish the book, but I'm not interested in continuing the series. However, the book pulls a real fast one. I wouldn't say it's a twist, but the conclusion really reeled me back in. The last third of the book, everything is moving, the pace suddenly picks up, there is lots of dramatic action happening, and I was really, really invested in the last 100 pages. The rest, getting up to there wasn't bad, but that was for me the real, where the book really hit its stride and kept going from there, which is what you want, the finale. You want the finale to be the most dramatic moment. I was so impressed with the character of Baru and how she developed over the course of the book, but having got to the end, you can see the steps that got us there. They're just not necessarily obvious in the moment. And maybe other people read this and didn't feel like it was a twist, but I was shooketh. I liked Baru as a character. Through most of the book, I liked her as a character. I thought she was smart, but maybe a little bit naive, intelligent in that kind of academic sense, rather than being worldly and experienced the way some of the other characters were. She was very brave, very dedicated to getting justice for her homeland, but I did feel that there was a naivety to her, getting swept up in some of the events that happen. And time again, I was almost shown that this wasn't necessarily the case, but I don't know, maybe I missed the signs. It wasn't until we were up against it when I suddenly cottoned on to what was happening. Baru is much more ambitious, much more ruthless, much more morally grey than I had pegged her to be. And I love me a morally grey protagonist, and I loved the way that played out. I had expected it to be more focused on that accounting side of it, that administrative side. I expected to like that and I did. I loved that her initial volley, her initial play into politics was done through taxation, done through moving of money, through changing of currency, through inflation and not fiddling the books, but playing the books in the monetary system. That was what I expected to get from the book, and I really enjoyed that. I loved that it worked here so well. It really felt like this, something you would overlook, something small in the everyday running of things, the accountancy, the taxes. I loved that it showed how important that could be when used in the right way. I wasn't expecting the second part of the book to go so much more into warfare and the strategy of warfare. And I do think that Dickinson does a really good job of showing you the connection between accountancy, that analytical way of thinking of moving figures around a ledger, and how that would translate into strategy and war games. And despite her being so young and constantly mentioned to be so young, it felt convincing that she was able to come up with these battle strategies to almost single-handedly design this battle campaign. Her flaws were, her constant flaws were things that experience gives you. The way she constantly was foiled by the fact that she forgot that other people had independent thoughts and feelings and motives of their own, that she considered people as pawns to be moved around a board and forgot that they were players in their own right. And that kind of constantly came around to bite her in the butt. And I think that played really well because it gave that nuance where this brilliant strategist, but sometimes not fully able to predict other people's movements. And yeah, the ending was, I thought, was so good. It really set up a character that I am fascinated to go into the next book with, which, like I say, it went from a potential DNF through the entire, it ran through the scale. And I don't know that I could ever rate it a 5-star because of that shaky pacing and because I had the thought of putting it down. But I think the payoff was worth it, and we had to go through that to get there. Dickinson is doing something with Baru as a character that I don't think I've seen in fantasy before, or at least not often. I think he's done something really brave with this character, with the protagonist, with the events that unfold. The blurb on the top of the book, I don't know if you can see, but it says, makes Game of Thrones look like Jack and Ori. That whole second half of the book is as action-packed, as full of naval battles, land battles, subterfuge, spying, and much like Game of Thrones, Dickinson is fearless in which characters he gives us an attachment to, which ones he rips away. I really wasn't expecting some of the different twists and turns, and I think it worked fantastically. I don't know what Baru's plan is next. I don't know where the next book is going to go, but the title is The Monster Baru Cormorant, so I'm very, very intrigued. I do think these are books that you have to take your time with though, so I'm not going to be jumping into the next one straight away. I'm going to probably wait for the right moment to read it. I think it ends at a good point to do that. There are obviously things that will carry into this next book, but I don't think it felt like we were, hanging on a cliff edge at the end. So between those two books, I have had a really good political fantasy week with this vlog. I've run the gauntlet, really, YA through to very dark adult. We've seen the on-the-run guerrilla warfare on both sides. We've seen politicking and spycraft on both sides. We have seen two really compelling slow burn romances and different payoffs and different ways of playing things out. I definitely want to continue with the next Baru book. I don't know if Seth Dickinson has other books, and I'm kind of happy not to look into that until I've continued with this. Whereas with Sherwood Smith, I do think there's other books in that world, but I'm probably going to try some of her other writing rather than going into the prequel novels, is my thought. Either way, I have now finished my Earth Kingdom line, my Earth Kingdom status, and have mastered earthbending, which means in January I can think about whether I want to move into the next tier of reading prompts, which I think we're meant to go in a certain order like the show, but I'm not entirely certain what comes after Earth. I think it might be air. Let me know if you know. In that case, I would probably be able to fit in quite a few books because the prompts at the beginning tend to be easier. So I would probably look at doing maybe 4 or 5 different prompts in that month. If you have been doing Avatar, definitely let me know. I would love to know how you're getting on. Let me know if you have read either of these books or if they interest you, and hopefully I will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.